At 2 in the morning, amidst a torrential downpour, my mother suddenly appeared at my doorstep. Her clothes were drenched, her face covered in bruises, her breathing ragged. "Help me," she choked out before collapsing on my porch. That night unleashed a battle I never could have anticipated. A clash between family loyalty and justice, between blood ties and harsh truths. And when I chose to stand by my mother, I had no idea that the outcome would drag our entire family to the depths of tragedy. Hello, my name is Cooper Hughes. I'm 31 years old, a police officer in Newton, Kansas, a small, peaceful town where everyone knows each other, and every street and corner is as familiar to me as the back of my hand. Here, people look at me with trust. My colleagues respect me for my integrity, and I take pride in that. But if you ask me what I'm most proud of in life, it's not the shiny police badge. It's the little house at the end of Cedar Lane, where my gentle wife, Lauren, and our bright 3-year-old daughter, Grace, live. Grace is always chattering away like a little bird. They are my world, the light that chases away the shadows I've tried to bury from my past. Every morning I wake up early, make coffee for Lauren, and take Grace to daycare. She loves holding my hand, babbling about everything under the sun, from a butterfly perched on a branch to a dream about a flying unicorn. Watching Grace's innocent smile, I quietly reassure myself that, in this challenging life, I've at least done one thing right. When I return home in the evening, I often find Lauren in the kitchen, humming an old tune, the smell of freshly baked bread filling the air. We sit down to dinner together, laughing and joking, and I feel that life is almost perfect. Almost. Because deep inside there's a dark corner I rarely touch. Memories of my father, Gerald Hughes, in the tense years of my childhood. I don't like talking about my father. To me, he's a part of my memory locked away in an old box and thrown into the depths of my mind. But if I must tell the story, I'll start with the image of the old house on the edge of town where I grew up. It wasn't a home. It was more like a battlefield, where my mother, Maggie Hughes, was always the losing side. My mother was a kind woman with sad but warm eyes, always trying to keep the peace in our family. She endured, sacrificed, and did everything to keep me and my father under one roof. But my father, Gerald, was a domineering, hot-tempered, and cruel man. He saw himself as the king of the house, where every decision had to follow his will, and anyone who disobeyed would pay a price. I still vividly remember the long nights of my childhood, curled up in bed, listening to my father yelling at my mother. His voice roared like thunder mixed with her sobs as she begged him to stop. Once I peeked through a crack in the door and saw my mother slumped on the floor holding her face, while my father stood over her, red-faced with rage, his fists clenched as if ready to strike again. I was only 8, too small to do anything but tremble and pray for it to stop. But it never did. The arguments, the slaps, the insults, they were an endless cycle etched deeply into my mind. My mother was my only anchor back then. After those storms, she would hold me close, whispering that everything would be okay, that she loved me more than anything. I believed her, but I could see the helplessness in her eyes. I wanted to protect her, to stand up to my father, but I was just a scared, weak kid. That feeling of powerlessness cut into me like a knife day after day. When I was 15, things got worse. One night, my father came home drunk and took his anger out on my mother again. I heard her cries, the sound of furniture being smashed. Unable to bear it any longer, I rushed out of my room, yelling at him to stop. It was the first time I dared confront him, but all I got was a hard punch to the chest, sending me sprawling to the floor. He glared at me, his eyes bloodshot, growling, "Who do you think you are, you little brat? You're as weak as your mother." I lay there in pain, but what hurt more was the overwhelming sense of helplessness, the realization that I couldn't protect the person I loved most. That punch changed my life. It ignited something in me, not hatred, but a determination to be stronger, to do something to stop injustices like this. That's why I chose to become a police officer. I wanted to bring justice to the vulnerable, to people like my mother who couldn't protect themselves. When I told my father about my decision, he scoffed, calling it a lowly job, serving the whole town. He didn't understand. and I didn't expect him to. To him, I was forever the weak son carrying my mother's blood, unworthy of his respect. As an adult, I left that house and cut off nearly all contact with my father. I still visited my mother, but only when he wasn't home. Each time I saw her, I noticed the invisible scars on her. Not just the bruises my father left, but the emotional pain she had endured for years. I tried to convince her to leave, but she would shake her head, saying she didn't want the family to fall apart. I understood her, but I couldn't accept it. Every time I left my parents' house, I carried a heavy feeling, as if I were abandoning her in an invisible prison. My life in Newton now is a completely different world. My little family is proof that I've overcome the past, that I've built a life worth living. But sometimes, in quiet moments, sitting alone on the sofa, listening to the ticking of the clock or the wind rustling through the window, I can't stop the old memories from resurfacing. The image of my father, with his cold eyes and voice sharp as a blade, remains vivid. I wonder if he ever felt remorse, if he ever thought about the wounds he inflicted on my mother and me. But then I shake my head, pushing the thought away. To him, control was everything, and people like my mother and me were just obstacles in his way. I've tried to bury the past, but it lingers like a silent shadow following me. I didn't know that on a stormy night soon to come, that shadow would return, darker than ever, pulling me into a whirlwind I couldn't foresee. That night, everything I'd built, my peace, my faith in justice, and my love for my family, would be tested to its very core. That fateful night, the rain poured down as if it meant to drown the entire town of Newton. The wind howled through the trees, mingling with the distant rumble of thunder. I had just finished a long shift at the police station, my body exhausted but my mind still taut like a tightly strung wire. As I stepped into the house, I peeled off my uniform, still carrying the faint smell of sweat, and hung it on the hook behind the door. I sank into the sofa, letting my body melt into the soft cushions, my eyes fixed on the window. The rain continued to fall, each heavy drop pounding against the glass as if reminding me that the world outside was never as peaceful as I wished it to be. Lauren and Grace had long been asleep. I could picture Grace curled up in her blanket, clutching her favorite teddy bear, a faint smile on her lips as she dreamed. Lauren was likely lying on her side, her long hair spilling over the pillow, her breathing soft and steady. Thinking of them, my heart softened. But just as I began to drift into sleep, a series of knocks at the door sliced through the silence like a knife. They were rapid, urgent, making my heart pound in my chest. I bolted upright, glancing at the clock. It was 2 a.m. Who would be knocking at this hour in the middle of a storm? My cop instincts kicked in, putting me on high alert. I stood, moving quietly to the small table by the door where I kept my service pistol. My hand brushed the cold metal, my fingers grazing the trigger. I took a deep breath, steadying my breathing, and approached the door. The knocking persisted, each rap hammering against my chest. "Cooper." A weak, trembling voice came from the other side of the door, nearly drowned out by the rain. But I recognized it instantly. That voice, no matter how faint, belonged to the person I loved most, my mother. I flung the door open and the sight before me stopped my heart. My mother, Maggie Hughes, was crumpled on the porch, soaked from head to toe. Her silver hair was matted against her face, rain mingling with blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. Her face was covered in bruises, one eye swollen shut, her clothes disheveled as if someone had yanked at them. Her breathing was shallow, each gasp like a stifled sob. I stood frozen, my mind reeling, as if the entire world had collapsed right in front of me. "Mom!" I dropped to my knees, wrapping my arms around her, feeling her body tremble from cold and fear. "Mom, what happened? Why are you here?" My voice cracked, unable to hide my panic. She didn't answer right away. She only grabbed my hand, her icy fingers digging into my skin as if clinging to her last shred of hope. "Cooper, I couldn't take it anymore," she sobbed, her voice breaking apart. I helped her up, practically carrying her inside, and slammed the door shut against the howling wind. I led her to the living room, sat her on the sofa, and rushed to grab a towel and a blanket. Kneeling before her, I gently wiped the rainwater from her battered face. Seeing the bruises, a surge of rage welled up in my chest, but I forced it down. Now wasn't the time to lose control. My mother needed me. "Mom, are you okay? What happened to you?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to keep it gentle. She looked up at me, her eyes clouded with tears and pain. "It was your father, Gerald." She paused, taking a shaky breath as if summoning courage. He hit me. He threw me out of the house, said he wanted to live with Lainey. Lainey. The name pierced my heart like a dagger. I knew of her, my father's young mistress, a woman barely older than me, always flashing a fake smile and calculating eyes. I'd heard whispers from neighbors about my father acting like a man possessed, chasing a younger woman and neglecting my mother. But I never imagined it would come to this. "Mom, calm down. I'm here now," I said, holding her hand, trying to pass some warmth to her. But inside I was seething. I wanted to storm out, find my father, and confront him right then and there. But looking at my mother, frail, broken, trembling before me, I knew I had to stay. She took a long, shuddering breath, her voice still choked with sobs. "Your father. He wanted me to sign papers. It's everything. The house, the land, everything we built over the years. He wanted to give it all to Lainey to live with her." She bowed her head, tears falling onto my hand. But I refused. I told him I couldn't do it. And then he lost it. He hit me, dragged me outside in the rain. He said I was nothing in that house anymore. I sat there listening to her every word, feeling as if someone were crushing my heart. Memories of my childhood flooded back. The nights I heard her cry, the times I watched her suffer, powerless to help. But this was different. This wasn't just another fight. This was betrayal, cruelty I couldn't stomach. My father hadn't just hit her, he wanted to strip her of everything she had, all for a woman who wasn't worth a dime. I tried to stay calm, to comfort her. I helped her change into dry clothes, dried her hair, every movement gentle as if I feared hurting her more. I set up a bed in the living room, tucking her in with warm blankets and helping her lie down. "Rest, Mom," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'm right here. You're safe now." She grabbed my hand, her eyes seeming to want to say something more, but she only nodded, exhausted, and closed her eyes. I sat beside her, watching as she drifted into sleep, her breathing finally steadying. But inside me, everything was erupting. Anger, pain, helplessness. They churned into a storm in my chest. I wanted to scream, to smash something, but I couldn't. Not now. I was Cooper Hughes, a cop, a husband, a father, and now the son who had to protect his mother. I stood and walked to the window, staring at the relentless rain. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one raging inside me. I knew from this night forward everything would change. My father had gone too far, and I wouldn't let him hurt my mother anymore. But deep down I was afraid. Afraid that this fight wouldn't just be between me and my father, but between me and the memories that had held me captive for years. I clenched my fists, trying to breathe evenly, then turned back to look at my mother lying on the bed, her breaths faint but finally peaceful. I told myself, she needs me, and I won't let her endure any more pain. The morning after, the sun rose, but its pale light couldn't dispel the lingering chill from the previous night's storm. I gently helped my mother up, assisting her into another set of Lauren's clean clothes. Seeing her in an oversized sweater, I felt a pang of heartache. She looked so small, so fragile, like a leaf crushed underfoot after a gust of wind. But her eyes, though still red from crying, held a faint glimmer, the spark of survival, of hope that I was determined to nurture. As I led her to the kitchen, Lauren stood there holding a steaming cup of tea, her eyes filled with worry. I had told her everything last night after my mother fell asleep. Lauren hadn't said much, just listened, but I noticed her eyes were red, her lips pressed tightly as if holding back her emotions. Now seeing my mother enter, Lauren set her tea down and rushed to embrace her tightly. "Mom, Maggie, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what you've been through," she said, her voice trembling, tears glistening in her eyes. I stood still, overwhelmed by the depth of love and empathy in Lauren's words. She wasn't just my wife. She was my rock, someone ready to open her arms and welcome my mother into our little family. "I'm okay, Lauren," my mother replied, her voice weak but managing a faint smile. Lauren shook her head, gripping my mother's hand tightly. "No, okay isn't enough. You deserve to be happy, to be safe. Cooper and I will always be here for you, you know that, right?" Watching Lauren, a warmth spread through my chest. Though the storm of emotions still raged within me, Lauren's strength and tenderness were like a beacon, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this fight. She was the woman who always knew how to soothe pain, not just mine, but that of everyone I loved. After saying goodbye to Lauren, I drove my mother to Newton Hospital, where Dr. Jane Carter, an old acquaintance, worked. On the way, my mother was silent, her gaze fixed on the car window as if trying to escape reality. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but my throat felt tight. Instead, I reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze, hoping she could feel that I was here and wouldn't leave her side. At the hospital, Dr. Carter examined my mother carefully. I stood outside the exam room, watching through the small glass window as my mother flinched each time the doctor touched the bruises on her arms and back. I had to look away, unable to bear the feeling of someone squeezing my heart. When Dr. Carter stepped out, her eyes were heavy with concern. "Cooper, your mother's condition is serious. Multiple bruises, some old but others fresh and very evident. These are signs of prolonged abuse. I'll document everything in her medical file. You need to report this to the police." I nodded, my voice hoarse. "I'm a cop, Jane, and I'll do everything to protect her." Dr. Carter placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent gesture of encouragement before returning to complete the paperwork. That medical file, with its cold clinical descriptions of each injury, would be the first piece of evidence in the battle I knew was inevitable. Back in the hospital room, I sat beside my mother, trying to keep my voice calm. "Mom, we need to file a report against Dad. What he's done to you is unacceptable. I can't let him keep doing this." But she only bowed her head, her frail hands trembling as they clutched the edge of the bed. "Cooper, I'm scared. I'm scared he'll retaliate. And the town, what will they say? They'll think I'm the one tearing the family apart." Her words cut into me like a knife. For years, she had lived in fear under my father's control, and even now, after escaping, his shadow still loomed over her. I knelt before her, taking both her hands and looking into her eyes. "Mom, I'm your son, and I'm also a cop. I swear to you I won't let Dad hurt you anymore. No one has the right to judge you for enduring so much for so long. You deserve to live, to be free. Let me help you, please." She looked at me, tears falling silently. Finally, she nodded, her voice a faint whisper. "All right, Cooper. I'll do what you say." I hugged her, feeling her tremble in my arms, but this time I knew it wasn't just fear. It was the beginning of liberation, however small. I left her at the hospital for the nurses to care for, then drove to the old house, the place where I grew up, the battlefield of my painful memories. Each step on that familiar road pulled me back to my childhood, when I was just a helpless boy hiding behind a door, listening to my mother's cries. But today, I was no longer that boy. I was Cooper Hughes, and I was here to confront my father. As I pushed the door open, the stench of alcohol hit me. The house, once my home, was now a mess littered with empty liquor bottles and cigarette butts. And there they were, my father, Gerald Hughes, and Lainey, his young mistress, sitting on the sofa, wrapped up in each other as if no one else existed. Lainey, with her dyed blonde hair and fake smile, leaned her head on my father's shoulder, giggling at something he whispered. The sight made my blood boil. "Dad!" I growled, stepping into the room. Both of them startled, turning to look at me. My father stood, his bloodshot eyes narrowing, his mouth curling into a sneer. "Well, well, my precious son." What are you doing here? Come to apologize for your mother? I didn't answer, my gaze shifting to Lainey. You. Who do you think you are, meddling in our family? You think you can take everything from my mother? My words were icy, but I fought to stay calm, refusing to let my emotions take over. Lainey smirked, standing and crossing her arms. Oh, Mr. Cop, spare me the moral lecture. Gerald chose me, not your mother. She's worthless to him now. I clenched my fists, about to respond when a sharp slap landed across my cheek. My head rang, my face stinging. My father stood there, his hand still raised, his eyes blazing as if he wanted to devour me. How dare you talk to Lainey like that? Who the hell do you think you are, lecturing me? Get out of here, you traitor. I stood frozen, my left cheek burning, but the pain in my heart was far worse. Memories of that night when I was 15 flooded back. The night he punched me, calling me a weak little brat. But this time, I didn't back down. I looked him in the eye, my voice low but steady. You hit Mom, threw her out of the house, and now you hit me to defend this woman? You don't deserve her, and you don't deserve this family. He roared, pointing at the door. Get out! I don't need you here. Lainey stood behind him, smirking as if she'd just won a game. I turned and walked out of the house, each step heavy as lead. But in my heart, a resolve had formed. I drove back to the hospital, my mind reeling with the images I'd just witnessed. The house where I grew up now felt like a foreign place, reeking of alcohol and betrayal. When I entered the hospital room, Dr. Carter was finishing her final check on my mother. She looked at me with a gentle but meaningful smile. Maggie's stable, Cooper. The physical wounds will heal in a few weeks with proper rest and care. But her mental state, that will take time. I nodded, feeling as if a boulder were pressing down on my chest. Thank you, Jane. I stepped into the room and saw my mother sitting on the bed, her gaze still distant but her complexion less pale. I sat beside her, taking her hand. Mom, I'm taking you home. To my home with Lauren and Grace. You'll stay with us, okay? She looked at me, her eyes welling up. You don't have to do that, Cooper. I don't want to burden your family. Her voice was soft, laced with guilt, as if she were a weight to bear. Mom, don't say that. I squeezed her hand firmly, my voice steady. You're my family. I want you in a safe place where you're loved. I won't let you go back to that house. She didn't say anything more, just nodded, and I knew that, despite her lingering fear, she trusted me. I brought her to our small house on Cedar Lane. Lauren had prepared a cozy little room with a bed draped in soft blankets and a vase of fresh flowers on the table. When my mother walked in, Lauren hugged her gently as if embracing a long-lost relative. Mom, Maggie, this is your home now, okay? Lauren said, her voice warm. My mother gave a faint smile, and I knew, though it was a small moment, it was the first time in days I'd seen a spark of light return to her eyes. In the days that followed, our family rallied around her. Lauren cooked her favorite dishes, steaming chicken soup, crisp cookies, and Grace, my 3-year-old, became an unexpected source of joy. She'd drag my mother to play with building blocks, chattering about unicorns and imaginary castles. My mother smiled more, though I sometimes caught her staring blankly, her eyes lost in some distant place, wrestling with painful memories. While caring for her, I began to take action. As a cop, I knew emotions alone weren't enough. I needed evidence, something my father couldn't deny in a court of law. I started with the small things. I visited Mrs. Wilson, our longtime neighbor, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a keen memory. She recounted the nights she heard shouting from my parents' house, the times she saw my mother wiping tears in the yard. I wanted to step in, Cooper, Mrs. Wilson said, her voice heavy with regret. But Maggie always told me not to. She was afraid of Gerald. Her statement, recorded and signed, became the first piece of the puzzle. Next, I went to the town clerk's office where property transfer records were kept. I requested a copy of the contract my father had pressured my mother to sign. The clerk, a young woman named Amy, looked at me with curious eyes but asked no questions. As she handed me the documents, she said softly, I heard about your mom. I'm so sorry, Cooper. I nodded, unwilling to let my emotions take over. The contract with my mother's shaky signature was clear evidence of coercion. I also kept the photos of my mother's injuries and a copy of her medical records from Dr. Carter. Each piece of evidence was a knife to my heart, but they were also weapons. Tools to protect my mother and ensure justice was served. A week after that fateful night, I felt I had enough. I called Gabriel Miller, an old college friend now working as a civil and family law attorney in Wichita. Gabriel was someone I trusted with a sharp mind and a warm heart. When I told him about my mother, his voice grew solemn over the phone. Cooper, bring everything you have to my office. We've got a lot of work to do. But as I pressed forward, my mother began to waver. One evening, as I was organizing the documents, she sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly. Cooper, I'm not sure this is right. If we sue your father, the whole town will know. They'll say I'm the one tearing the family apart. And he won't let this go. Her voice trembled with fear. I stopped looking at her, trying to suppress the anger rising in me, not at her, but at my father, at the years that had made her so afraid. Mom, listen to me. Dad has no right to hurt you, no right to take what you deserve. I know you're scared, but I promise I'll be with you every step of the way. We're not doing this to destroy the family. We're doing this to set you free. I took her hand, feeling her thin fingers tremble in mine. Finally, she nodded, though her eyes still held a trace of doubt. The next day, I took her to Gabriel's office in Wichita. It was a small, tidy room lined with bookshelves full of legal documents and a framed degree on the wall. Gabriel greeted us with a smile that was both professional and warm. I placed the stack of evidence on his desk, photos of my mother's injuries, the medical records, Mrs. Wilson's statement, and the property transfer contract. Gabriel flipped through each page, his eyes sharp, then looked at my mother. Mrs. Maggie, I promise I'll do everything to protect you. What you've been through is unacceptable, and we'll make Gerald accountable. Under Gabriel's guidance, my mother and I signed the lawsuit against Gerald Hughes, accusing him of domestic abuse and property coercion. As I put pen to paper, my hand didn't shake, but my heart felt heavy. This was a step from which there was no turning back. As we left the office, I held my mother's hand, feeling her frail fingers tremble slightly in mine. Her eyes still carried a hint of doubt, but I saw a faint glimmer of hope, like a fragile flame that refused to go out. I knew things would escalate from here, and my father, the man I once feared, would now officially face the consequences. But deep inside, I couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. A few days later, while I was fixing Grace's bicycle in the garage, my phone rang. The screen displayed a familiar number, my father's. My heart tightened, but I answered, keeping my voice calm. Hello, Dad. His voice roared through the line, cold and seething with anger, like thunder in a stormy night. You traitor. You dare sue me? Who do you think you are, going against your own father? His curses poured out like a flood, each word a sharp stab. You and your mother, two weaklings, only know how to ruin this family. You'll regret this, Cooper. I took a deep breath, suppressing the anger surging in my chest. Memories of his slap, of the nights my mother cried, of her crumpled under the rain that night flashed vividly in my mind. Dad, I replied, my voice low but firm, you've hurt Mom, not just once, but for years. Did you think you could keep doing that without anyone standing up? I'm not betraying the family. I'm protecting her. He let out a harsh, scornful laugh, a dry, mocking sound. Protecting? You're just a lowly cop playing hero. I'll show you how wrong you are. Then he hung up, leaving me with the cold, endless beep. I stood there, gripping the phone tightly, feeling as if the world was closing in around me. But I wasn't afraid. Not because I was strong, but because I knew I was doing the right thing. A few hours later, the phone rang again, and my heart sank when I saw my father's number. I answered, bracing myself, but this time his voice wasn't shouting. It was low, dripping with malice. You think this court order will stop me, Cooper? You think Maggie can hide behind you to defy me? She'll face me soon enough. His threat sent a chill through me. I clenched my fist, keeping my voice steady. Dad, if you dare touch Mom, I won't hold back. This is your last warning. He scoffed, a sound full of defiance, and hung up. Real worry set in the next morning when Lauren called while I was at the station preparing paperwork. Her voice trembled over the phone. Cooper, can you come home now? Your father, he was just at the gate. He was yelling for Mom, demanding to see her, saying she can't hide forever. She's terrified, Cooper. I raced to the car, speeding home, my mind spinning with images of my mother cowering in a corner, like in the old days. When I arrived, my father was gone, but my mother was on the sofa, hugging herself tightly, her eyes red. He won't stop, will he? She whispered. I hugged her, my voice firm despite the weight in my heart. Mom, I won't let him hurt you. I promise. I held her, trying to comfort her, but inside I knew my father was deliberately provoking us, defying the court order hanging over him. I checked every lock in the house and contacted the patrol team to increase surveillance. My father had gone too far, and I had to be ready to protect my mother no matter what he did. After those provocations, my father began his counterattack. He hired an expensive lawyer from Wichita, a man named Richard Voss, known for his sharp tactics and willingness to play dirty. Word spread through town that my father was telling everyone my mother was paranoid, claiming she imagined the beatings and that all property transfer documents were legal. Worse, he spread rumors that I, a cop, was abusing my authority to frame my own father. The whispers spread like wildfire in our small town. Some people looked at me with suspicion during my patrols. Others shook their heads when I entered the grocery store. But I stayed silent. I didn't respond or explain. I knew the truth would speak for itself in court. In the days leading up to the trial, I continued caring for my mother. Each morning I made her coffee, sat with her and Lauren in the kitchen, trying to create a sense of peace. Grace, with her childlike innocence, always made my mother smile with her silly stories. But I knew my mother was still afraid. Some nights I heard her wake up sitting in the dark, her hands clasped tightly as if holding on to her courage. "Are we doing the right thing, Cooper?" she once asked, her voice trembling. I held her hand and said, "Mom, we're doing what's right. I won't let you face this alone." 2 weeks later, the court date arrived. The air in the courtroom was heavy, stifling, as if the whole world held its breath. I sat beside my mother, her hand ice-cold in mine. Gabriel, calm but sharp, stood at the podium, presenting each piece of evidence clearly. My mother's medical records, photos of her bruises, Mrs. Wilson's testimony, and the property transfer contract with her shaky signature. Each piece was a bullet, and I saw my father, sitting across the room, growing restless. His lawyer, Voss, tried to dismantle the case, arguing that my mother had a mental disorder and inflicted the injuries herself to frame my father. But Gabriel didn't falter. He called Dr. Carter to the stand, and she stated firmly, "The injuries on Mrs. Maggie could not have been self-inflicted. They are consistent with prolonged abuse." My father sat there, his face flushed, hands clenched. Lainey behind him looked anxious, her usual fake smile gone. I glanced at my mother, who kept her head bowed, silent tears falling, but she no longer trembled. She knew this time she wasn't alone. When the judge, a stern middle-aged woman, delivered the verdict, the courtroom fell silent. The property transfer contract is declared void. Gerald Hughes is ordered to divide the assets per divorce law. Furthermore, due to proven domestic abuse, a restraining order is issued prohibiting Gerald Hughes from contacting Maggie Hughes. Her voice was clear, uncompromising. My father leapt up, shouting in the courtroom, "This is a sham! You can't do this to me!" His face was red, eyes wild, but 2 officers stepped forward, restraining him. Lainey hurried out of the room, not daring to look back. I felt my mother gently squeeze my hand, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from her. As we left the courtroom, the sunlight outside was blinding, but my heart remained heavy. Justice had prevailed, my mother was free, but I knew my father wasn't one to accept defeat easily. He wouldn't stop, and I had to prepare for what was coming. I turned to my mother, who lifted her head and took a deep breath, as if, for the first time in years, she could truly breathe. "Thank you, Cooper," she whispered. I smiled, holding her hand, feeling her frail fingers grip mine tightly. In that moment, I knew I'd done the right thing, even if the cost was scars in my heart that might never heal. In the days following the trial, I officially brought my mother to live with our little family on Cedar Lane. Our small home, already warm with Grace's laughter and Lauren's tenderness, became a sanctuary for my mother, a place where she could start anew, free from fear. As she stepped into the house, Lauren hugged her tightly as if she were an indispensable part of our family. "Mom, Maggie, this is your home," Lauren said, her voice warm, her eyes sparkling. Grace, my 3-year-old, ran up, tugging at my mother's hand and chirping, "Grandma, play with me." Seeing my mother smile at Grace, I noticed a spark in her eyes, a spark of life, of hope, something I rarely saw in the years she lived under my father's shadow. My mother began to come back to life, like a wilted flower revived by water and sunlight. At first, she was hesitant, often sitting alone in her room, her gaze lost in painful memories. But Lauren and Grace, with their sincerity and innocence, gently pulled her out of that darkness. One morning, I found her sitting on the living room floor with Grace, piecing together a puzzle to form a castle. Grace giggled, pointing at a red piece and saying, "Grandma, this is the unicorn's roof." My mother laughed, a genuine, unforced laugh, and replied, "Oh, the unicorn will love that, Grace." I stood at the door, watching silently, my heart warmed by the sight. Moments like these convinced me that taking my father to court was the right decision. I had freed my mother from a life of abuse, and now she was rediscovering herself. In the evenings, we gathered around the dining table, where Lauren set out simple but loving meals: mashed potatoes, beef stew, and a plate of cookies that my mother and Grace had baked together. Grace's childish laughter filled the air, mingling with Lauren's gentle storytelling and my mother's soft responses. Once, I saw my mother and Lauren standing in the kitchen, washing dishes together, chatting about little things, from recipes to old movies my mother used to love. "You know, I used to enjoy cooking when I was young," my mother said to Lauren, her voice soft, as if she were reclaiming pieces of herself from long-forgotten memories. Watching her smile return, I felt a deep sense of comfort. This was what I had always dreamed of, a true home where my mother was loved and respected. But while my mother slowly found her light, my father, Gerald Hughes, sank deeper into darkness. News about him spread through Newton like a cold wind creeping through the streets. After the trial, he became the subject of hushed whispers. Neighbors who once greeted him with polite smiles now avoided him, turning away when they saw him. His old friends, the men who used to gather for beers and boastful talk, gradually disappeared. This small town didn't forgive abusers, and my father, with all his arrogance, was now a mere shadow of himself. I heard from a colleague at the police station that my father had started frequenting a seedy bar on the outskirts of town, where dim lights flickered and the air reeked of alcohol. He spent his nights there, drowning in whiskey, drunk to the point of losing control. Someone I knew recounted seeing him yelling in the bar, cursing my mother, cursing me, and even Lainey, the young mistress he had once placed his entire world in. "They all betrayed me," he shouted, slamming his glass on the table, as those around him shook their heads and turned away. Then came the news that didn't surprise me but still stung. Lainey had left him. With her dyed blonde hair and fake smile, she quickly found a new man, someone richer, more generous, willing to bankroll her desires. I heard she openly flaunted her new relationship, as if my father had never existed in her life. He was left alone, humiliated, with no one left by his side. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction, but a larger part felt an indescribable sadness. He was my father, despite the unforgivable things he'd done. Seeing him fall apart, I couldn't help but feel a void in my heart. Each passing day highlighted the stark contrast between two worlds. In my home, my mother was slowly coming back to life, finding joy in the simplest things. Meanwhile, my father sank deeper into the mire of his own making, shunned by society and stripped of everything he once valued. But I knew that peace was only superficial, as my father's shadow still lurked somewhere. Then one evening, while I was on duty at the police station, the air was so quiet it felt almost stifling. Only the hum of the air conditioner and the rustle of paperwork from the colleague beside me broke the silence. I was reviewing patrol reports, trying to focus, but my mind wavered between the joy of seeing my mother smile and a vague anxiety about my father. Suddenly, the phone on my desk rang, shattering the stillness. I picked it up, and Tom, a colleague from the patrol team, spoke urgently. "Cooper, you need to know this. Your father, Gerald, just caused a scene at the bar on the edge of town. He smashed tables and chairs, shouting nonsense, and he seemed completely out of control." I gripped the receiver tightly, my heart pounding. "What exactly happened, Tom? What did he do?" I tried to keep my voice calm, but a storm was brewing inside me. Tom hesitated, as if reluctant to continue. He was cursing Lainey, calling her a traitor. He screamed that he wouldn't let anyone who turned their back on him get away with it. "Your mom, he mentioned both of you. The people at the bar were scared and called us. He was gone before the patrol arrived." I hung up, a chill running down my spine. My father wasn't just drowning in alcohol, he was nursing a deep-seated hatred. What unsettled me even more was news from a neighbor a few days later. My father had been seen lurking near our neighborhood, standing in the shadows of a tree at night like a silent specter watching. Despite the court's restraining order, I knew my father wasn't one to follow rules. I began checking windows and locks every night, keeping my gun within reach and reminding Lauren to be cautious when going out. I didn't want my mother or my family to face any more danger. Then on a night of heavy rain, while I was working a late shift at the station, the phone rang again. This time, Tom's voice was trembling, more urgent than ever. "Cooper, there's been a murder at the apartment complex on the north side of town. The victim is a young woman stabbed multiple times. Initial reports confirm it's Lainey, your father's former mistress." My heart stopped. Her name, Lainey, rang in my head like a death knell. I didn't like her, but the thought of a murder and the possibility of my father's involvement chilled me to the bone. "You're sure, Tom?" I asked, my voice faltering. "What about the suspect?" "We're investigating, but a witness reported seeing Gerald nearby before it happened. He wasn't at the scene when we got there." Tom paused, then continued, his voice low. "A warrant's been issued, Cooper. You okay?" I didn't answer right away, just nodded to myself, though I knew Tom couldn't see. "I'm fine. Follow protocol. I'm heading to the scene now." But as I hung up, I sank into my chair, my mind spinning. Newton was reeling, and the news spread like wildfire. Local papers ran sensational headlines about the horrific murder and the abusive father turned suspect. Each word felt like a stab, reminding me that this nightmare wasn't just about my mother anymore. It had engulfed the entire town. 24 hours later, as I was at the station trying to stay calm amid the flurry of calls and reports, the front door swung open. A figure stumbled in, reeking of alcohol. It was my father. His clothes were stained with blood, his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. In his hand was a knife, loosely wrapped in a tattered cloth. He tossed it onto the desk, the metal clanging sharply against the wood in the silent station. Then he looked straight at me, his voice hoarse. "I did it. I killed her. Lainey. She betrayed me, and I made her pay." The entire station fell silent. My colleagues, used to tense situations, stood frozen, their eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. I stood there, hands trembling, staring at the man before me. Not just a murderer, but my father. The man I had once feared, hated, and hoped might one day change. Memories of my childhood flooded back. His shouting, his slaps, my mother crying silently in a corner. But now, standing before me, was a man who had crossed every line, whose hatred had turned him into a monster. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the tidal wave of emotions surging inside me. My hands shook as I picked up the handcuffs, the cold metal a stark reminder of my duty. "Gerald Hughes," I said, my voice icy, "you're under arrest for murder." I stepped forward and cuffed his wrists. The sharp click of the handcuffs cut through me like a blade. My father looked at me, his eyes a mix of anger and an indescribable pain. He let out a hoarse, choked laugh. "So you finally turned against me. But don't forget, I'm still your father." His words were a final dagger piercing deep into my heart. As my colleagues led him away, I stood motionless, feeling as if the world were collapsing around me. I knew I had done the right thing. I had upheld justice, protected my mother, protected this town. But as the door to the holding cell closed behind my father, I felt an unfillable void. I had lost the last remnant of what tied me to him. Not family, but the hope that one day he could have been a real father. A few days later, as I sat in the kitchen with my mother, sipping coffee and watching Grace play in the yard, my mother suddenly set her cup down, her expression turning serious. "Cooper," she said, her voice soft but resolute, "I want to see your father. In jail. I need to talk to him one last time." Her words hit me like a shockwave. I looked at her, searching for a hint of hesitation in her eyes, but found only a determination I had never seen before. "Mom, why would you want that? He's done unforgivable things. Seeing him will only hurt you more," I said, my voice laced with worry. I feared that even a moment facing my father would drag her back into the darkness of the years she spent controlled and hurt. But she shook her head, her frail hand grasping mine. "Cooper, I know you're worried about me. But I need to do this. Not for him, but for me. I need to say the things I've held inside for years. I need closure." Her eyes were steadfast, as if she had found a strength I hadn't expected. I sighed and nodded. "All right, Mom, I'll take you." The next day I drove her to the county jail where my father was being held. On the way she was silent, her gaze fixed on the scenery outside the window, but I noticed she no longer trembled as she once did. I wanted to ask what she planned to say to him, but I didn't dare. Instead, I held her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze, a silent promise that I'd be by her side no matter what happened. The visiting room in the jail was cold and stark, with gray walls and an old metal table dividing the two sides. I sat beside my mother, my heart racing, unsure of what lay ahead. When the iron door creaked open, my father shuffled in, wearing an orange jumpsuit, looking gaunt, his face haggard, his bloodshot eyes a mix of remorse and bitterness. When he saw my mother, I caught a fleeting softness in his gaze, as if a trace of the man he once was lingered. But he quickly stiffened, sitting across from us, his mouth curling into a scornful smirk. "So you came to gloat, Maggie." His voice was sharp, accusatory. "You and your precious son have ruined my life. Are you satisfied now?" I clenched my fists, anger surging, but my mother placed a hand on my arm, signaling me to stay quiet. Then she lifted her head, meeting his eyes. For the first time in years, I saw her neither bow nor flinch. Her voice was firm, clear, though it trembled slightly with emotion. "Gerald, I didn't come here to gloat. I came to say the things I've held inside for 30 years. You hit me, controlled me, made me live in fear. But the worst pain wasn't the bruises on my body. It was how you treated our son, how you turned our family into a nightmare." He tried to interrupt, but she raised her hand, her voice growing stronger. "You chose your path, Gerald. You chose violence, betrayal, selfishness. But I won't let you drag me down anymore. I've endured enough, and now I'm free. I'm not here to forgive you. I'm here to tell you that I'm no longer afraid of you." Her words were like a powerful gust, sweeping through the cold room. I looked at her, torn between heartache and admiration. Heartache for the years she endured, and admiration for the strength she had found within herself. My father sat there, his face flushed, hands clenched, but speechless. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he realized he had lost all the power he once held. Finally he stood, his eyes still bitter but his voice softer, almost a whisper. "You think you've won, Maggie? The whole world's against me, but I'll never forget." He turned, leaving us, heading toward the iron door. As it closed behind him, I heard him muttering as if blaming the world for his own downfall. My mother and I left the jail in silence. On the drive home, neither of us spoke. But when I held her hand, I felt a sense of release, not just for her, but for me too. She had faced the demon of her past and emerged victorious. Yet, in my heart, a lingering sorrow remained. My father, despite his unforgivable actions, was still a part of me, and this meeting felt like a final knife, severing the fragile threads that still connected us. In the days that followed, I returned to my work at the police station. Each morning, I put on my uniform, pinned on my badge, and stepped into a world of law and duty. But every time I drove past the county jail where my father was held, my heart ached. I tried not to look at the gray building, but it loomed like a shadow at the edge of my vision. My father, Gerald Hughes, was now an abuser, a murderer, yet he was also the man I once called Dad, the man I had, in my weakest moments, hoped might change. I told myself that family ties couldn't excuse his crimes. I had done the right thing by cuffing him, by letting justice speak. But that didn't ease the pain in my heart. Every night as I lay in bed, his voice echoed in my mind. "I'm still your father." Those words clung to me like a curse, making me wonder if I could ever truly escape the darkness of my past. But life moved forward, and I had my mother, Lauren, and Grace, my guiding lights. My mother had become an essential part of our little home. She often sat by the window, reading or knitting, sometimes smiling as she listened to Grace's innocent stories. Lauren treated her like a friend, a second mother, and I was grateful for the love she gave her. At every dinner, as we gathered around the table, Grace's laughter and my mother's gentle voice made me feel that, no matter how painful the past, I had built a true home. One weekend afternoon, as the sunset painted the Newton sky golden, I decided to take my mother, Lauren, and Grace to a field on the outskirts of town. A place where, as a child, my mother and I would escape to avoid my father's fights. I still remembered those afternoons sitting on the grass with her, watching the sunset, her hand holding mine as she whispered, "Everything will be okay, Cooper." Those words, though fragile comfort at the time, had carried me through the darkest days. Now, returning to that field, everything was different. My mother sat on a blanket, her silver hair glimmering in the twilight, her eyes more peaceful than ever. Lauren and Grace chased each other across the field, Grace's laughter echoing through the air, blending with the cool breeze. I sat beside my mother, watching her give a faint smile. "I remember this place," she said softly. "Back then, I just wanted you to know there were still beautiful moments, even when things at home were so bad." She paused, taking a deep breath, then looked at me. "Now I feel free, Cooper. Thank you." I held her hand, feeling its warmth, no longer trembling. "You deserve it," I replied, my voice hoarse with emotion. Looking at her, then at Lauren and Grace playing in the distance, I realized that my father's violent past would always leave scars in my heart. But I also knew I had broken those chains. I had given my mother a chance to live again, and I was determined to raise Grace in love and safety, things I never had as a child. Justice sometimes comes late, and the cost is steep. I had lost my father, not because he was imprisoned, but because he chose a path of violence and destruction. But if you dare to face the truth, to stand up for what's right, pain can become strength. As a cop, I protected this town, but as a son, I protected my mother. And that, to me, was the most important victory. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I hugged my mother, feeling her warmth and hearing Grace's laughter echo from afar. In that moment, I knew that no matter how haunting the past, I had found my light. In my family and love, and in the choice to stand for what was right.